I'm Steve Foskett, and this is Worcester by Bike. Welcome to episode 3 of Worcester by Bike. We're here in the Common, beautiful May day. Sun's out, dandelion's out. Today we're going to be taking a little look at some of the places associated with Marshall Major Taylor, America's first African-American cycling champion, way back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Pretty amazing guy, pretty amazing story, amazing life. Lived most of his life in Worcester. Tonight, author Michael Kranish is going to be in town at the Jewish Community Center giving a talk on his new biography he's got coming out of Major Taylor. He promises to have some real new first-hand research that he's done on the life of what had previously been sort of an obscure guy, but he's been getting his due in recent years. So we're going to go check out some of the places in Worcester that he's been, that he lived, that he's memorialized. Come along. Our first stop is right across from the Common, the Worcester Public Library, where we have the Major Taylor statue, dedicated in 2008 after years of fundraising and some state money that came through. The Major Taylor Association had this built to raise awareness. The statue certainly doesn't shy away from mentioning the sort of casually blatant racism of the day. People either didn't think he had a right to be at races, or he was assaulted during those races. He sustained many injuries over his career just from people knocking him down, people throwing stuff at him from the sidelines. He really had to persevere. Now from the library, we're headed to George Street. So there was some construction earlier today that forced us to come back later in the day, and I'm a little afraid of the weather tonight, so I wanted to squeeze in a run here at George Street. It's 500 feet, average of 18% grade, but that does vary. I feel like it gets a little steeper in places. It's not that hard to get up there, but it's hard to get up there fast, as exemplified by my times every year, the George Street Challenge. It's a very fun event. Now, in his autobiography, Major Taylor actually mentions practicing up George Street. He had a single speed back then, which is crazy. But he said that was a good way to judge whether a cyclist was any good enough. Whew. Right now we're on Major Taylor Boulevard. Not a particularly bike-friendly, or it doesn't really have too many features, but it's named after Major Taylor. So now we're headed out of downtown. We're going to go to Major Taylor's old neighborhood. So you start winning races, you're traveling the world, you're all over the country, you start making a ton of money. What do you do if you're Major Taylor? You come back to Worcester and you buy 4 Hobson Avenue over here in Columbus Park. Now we're headed to our last stop on the sort of Major Taylor tour of Worcester, which is basically Mill Street. There's no signage that I can ever find, but it is actually, through local legend, called the Major Taylor Bikeway. If anything surprised you, really surprised you in the course of your research for this book about Major Taylor or Worcester or anything in particular?
Well, it's always shocking to read about just the difficult racism that Major Taylor faced in the 1890s, early 1900s. I knew that, but it was even worse than I could have imagined. And then as I researched more about Worcester, I was surprised that in the 1920s, the largest Klan rally ever held in New England was held here in Worcester. And I described in today's talk how, while he was writing his autobiography, a couple miles away, there were thousands of Klan members at the agricultural fairgrounds rallying. So it must have been very difficult for Major Taylor, who'd fought against racism all his life, to know that all those years later there was a Kkk rally here in Worcester. So it's part of what I talked about, because it helps you understand incredibly difficult times that he was living through.
He probably could have lived in a lot of different places. What do you think about that connection that he had with Worcester that made him want to stay? It was really his home base for a long time.
Well, Worcester had welcomed him when he had faced a lot of racism in Indianapolis, where he had lived previously. So Worcester was his home. It doesn't surprise me he wanted to build a home here. He had connections to the community, to the church. So he did feel very strong about wanting to stay in Worcester. When he tried to buy that house, a lot of the white neighbors didn't want him to buy that house. They tried to keep him away. They threatened to sue him. But in the end, he said, no, this is my home. I bought it. I'm going to stay here. And he did.
Good. Well, unfortunately, things didn't quite work out for Major Taylor later in his life after he retired. He ended up splitting up with his wife. He moved back to Chicago. He sort of died anonymously there. I also think it's cool when you think about whether, you know, you could somehow get him to the current day, you know, hand him a bicycle and he would know exactly what to do with it. It's what a perfect machine the bicycle is. He'd be able to hop right on and he'd be amazed at having gears, I think, and he'd scoot right up this hill.